And if they're trying to fend off what's happening by the Trump administration, they're probably not looking at what they should be doing instead, which is creating more opportunities for growth that are going to serve residents better than what they're doing. There's no wonder why so many people are leaving California in the process. And so I really think they've got to prioritize people over politics, and that's the real path to progress, allowing for people to prosper. Hello. Welcome to this week's economy. I'm your host, Dr. Vance Ginn. I hope you're having a prosperous day. Well, we've got a lot to talk about. I want to jump right into it. But first, I want to say that I had a great time this week being at the American Institute for Economic Research Monetary Conference, Fixing the Fed's Framework, up in D.C. Great time. Many great speakers. Some Federal Reserve officials were there. Many think tankers and friends. So it's just a great part of that. If you were there, it was great to see you there. You should check out AIER if you haven't already. I also was at ALEC, the American Legislative Exchange Council meetings this week. Got to hear a lot about tax policy, AI policy, social media issues, and a whole bunch of other things. But it was also great to meet with so many freedom fighters from across the country. I hope that you will continue to do that, as I know I will, each and every day. And in addition to all that, make sure to go to vanceginn.substack.com so you can get your subscription to my newsletter each and every day. All right, so let's get right into it. We got a lot to talk about. Number one, Trump tariffs hurt Texans. In the news, on the campaign trail, and since his election day victory, President-elect Donald Trump has threatened to impose higher tariffs on goods entering the United States. Most recently, Trump has announced a 25% tariff on all goods across the border from Mexico and Canada. Economists warn of increased prices of consumer goods and other harmful impacts on American households, especially in the poor or on the people in Texas. I had an interview with Newsweek, which I put a link in my show notes as well, talking about this and just saying, look, I mean, at the end of the day, tariffs are a costly mistake. They're a tax that hits Americans. It doesn't actually do anything when you think about trade deficits or the trade and things of that nature. We still continue to buy more from them because we consume things. We consume more than what we produce here in America. And so we're going to consume elsewhere as well. So why raise taxes on them? Instead, we should be looking at reducing barriers to work and high taxes and high spending and regulations and all that stuff here in America. So that way we can have more trade and do more things here, right? In the process, instead of trying to force things through these sort of tariffs. And I really don't even think it's a very good tool to bring others to the negotiating table if we're even going to do that. There may be a good argument in the sense of national security, but I think that's few and far between. And look, a 25% tariff on Canada and Mexico, goods from Canada and Mexico, that's just massive. I mean, we import a lot, especially in Texas where I live, right across the border, right? These have been longtime trading partners. And I understand there's some concern when you think about the amount of people that are coming across the border in Mexico, but I don't understand the concern with Canada. I really don't know what's going on there. Texas exported a lot to Canada and to Mexico, just like they imported actually across the country. And so I really think that President-elect Donald Trump and even Texas Governor Greg Abbott should focus on reducing spending, taxes, and regulations while promoting free markets and more trade. I mean, that's really how we get more, ability to satisfy our desires, is when we can purchase things we want. Remember, we've got to save, we've got to use our time first in order to work, get income, and then you spend to satisfy your desires. And many of those things that you spend money on be coming from Mexico and other places. And remember, a lot of the imports that we have are actually intermediate goods in the production process. So that goes into manufacturing and other things that we produce versus what many people would say was all just final goods and cheaper goods coming in. That's just not the case at the end of the day. All right. We need trade. Trade is good. Let's try to find a way back to that. I'm concerned about Peter Navarro being selected as trade czar within the White House complex, and some of the other picks that have been chosen so far, as these are more protectionists that I think are heading us in the wrong direction. Manufacturing isn't going to come back the same way it was before. We're still reaching manufacturing output highs in America, record highs. Okay, employment is down, but that's also from automation. That's a lot from bad policies over time. So if a lot of these are just government failures, let's not double down on those mistakes. Let's move on to something different. All right. Number two, Inflation's latest impacts. In the news, the Federal Reserve's preferred inflation measure, the Personal Consumption Expenditures, the PCE, price index, reports a 12-month inflation rate of 2.3%, rising 0.2% over the month. If you exclude food and energy, which is the core PCE index, which is really what the Fed likes the most, it was up 2.8% year over year. This exceeds the Fed's 2% flexible average inflation target, which was talked a lot about at the AIER meetings. Speaking also at this event was Federal Reserve Governor Christopher Waller, who hinted at further rate cuts. All right. So my take on this, as I've talked about before, is I think the Federal Reserve is always behind the curve. They should not be trying to manipulate interest rates or other markets, which is why they should focus on their balance sheet. And there was actually some talk, Orphanides talked some about, the share of GDP on the balance sheet was 6%, which I've talked about here before the pandemic. And now it's close to 25% of the overall GDP on the Fed's balance sheet. That's just too much. I mean, there's no reason for there to be that much money, $7 trillion on the Federal Reserve's balance sheet. And that manipulates a lot of the other markets and interest rates and the orders of production. I mean, I could go into all of that. But also when you just look at the numbers, right? The latest numbers from this PCE and the core up 2.8%, that's well above the 2% average inflation target they'd want. And I would hope that this is not, asymmetric to where you leave it higher than you otherwise, or you allow for it to be higher than otherwise, because it should be symmetric. We should also have lower inflation for a period of time, if not deflation, where actually prices go down. We've seen moderated inflation, but it's still compounding on the increases that were before. So these are some massive problems that are going to continue to hit us hard and hit families hard. And it's it was the number one thing on people's minds going in the election. Okay. And I don't see that changing anytime soon unless the Fed gets its act in order and the incoming Trump administration can work with the Doge and OMB and others and say, you know what, we've got to start cutting government spending, reduce the national debt. That would give less fuel and less power to the Federal Reserve in the process. And then I think we'll be in a better way, not only for the debt and deficits and the amount it's costing us, but also in inflation that's really hitting us today. All right. Number 3, U.S. jobs report. Well, non-farm payroll jobs rose by 227,000 in the month of November, compared with an upwardly revised 36,000 in October, and the Dow Jones consensus estimate for 214,000, so it's well above that. The unemployment rate edged higher to 4.2%, which was expected. Traders accelerated their bets on an interest rate cut this month following the payrolls released. Job gains were focused in healthcare at 54,000, leisure and hospitality at 53,000, and oh, by the way, government 33,000. More than 10% of the jobs were there. There was a revision upward in the last 2 months, though, about 56,000. So, I mean, that was a good sign overall. But I still think that this labor market has a lot of weaknesses involved. Remember, the previous month there was some estimates that weren't in there because of hurricanes that had crossed Helene and others. Also, there was a strike that was going on, and so there was a pretty big dip or very slow job creation that month. In fact, the private sector actually declined by 6,000 jobs in that month. So some of that was just the bounce back of them coming on. And so if you think about that, I still think there's a lot of weaknesses that are going on. And so much of this is government related jobs, which is healthcare, direct government jobs, or in education. So that's something we really want to watch. We should also look at the household survey. Had a drop in the labor force by 193,000 in the month of November, with employment falling by 355,000. So, there's also often some differences between the establishment report showing 227,000 jobs added and the household report showing 355,000 jobs lost, right? And this is because of the different surveys that they use. And then a number of unemployed increased by 161,000. We're actually up almost 1 million people unemployed over the last year. That brings the unemployment rate to 4.2%, which is up from 3.7% a year ago. So we've seen a pretty large increase, half percentage point increase in the unemployment rate, which usually is indicative of recession coming up. So I think this is one reason why we're seeing so many other issues. And average weekly earnings are up 3.7%, which is above inflation where it's running right now. But remember, average weekly earnings are still down from where they were in January 2021 of nearly 4%. And this is also a big reason why so many people are concerned about the economy. What we need are more pro-growth policies. I'm putting a lot of this information in all of my stuff. And check out my policy guide as well. I'll have that in the show notes page. But we really need more pro-growth policies, or we're not going to correct the past mistakes. The next one here is California budget woes. In the news, California Governor Gavin Newsom and state lawmakers convened a special legislative session to bolster the state budget and, quote, Trump-proof California's Department of Justice. The legislature allocated $25 million for legal fees to defend state policies on civil rights, abortion, immigration, and climate change from potential federal challenges. My take on this is the purpose of state budgets is to prioritize where you want those dollars. These don't seem like good priorities for me for California. They should be prioritizing how they're running deficits and spending way too much. And that would be a much better situation for taxpayers. And if they're trying to fend off what's happening by the Trump administration, they're probably not looking at what they should be doing instead, which is creating more opportunities for growth that are going to serve residents better than what they're doing. There's no wonder why so many people are leaving California in the process. And so I really think they've got to prioritize people over politics. And that's the real path to progress and allowing for people to prosper, okay? The next issue is the future of healthcare under the Trump administration. In the news, the future of Biden's Enhanced Affordable Care Act subsidies, set to expire in 2025, remains uncertain under a potential Trump administration. Trump's cost-cutting agenda and congressional input will shape the path forward for healthcare policies affecting millions of Americans. So I'm hopeful that, with the DOJ, Department of Government Efficiency, they can find a lot of waste, fraud, and abuse. And Medicaid is going to be a prime target for that, along with the other safety net programs that are out there. But we also need to be moving to block granting a lot of these things to send to the states so they have flexibility in what they want to do. I'm working on some of that right now on market-based solutions for healthcare and other areas. But Medicaid ultimately should be up to having health savings accounts for individuals to use it. And so there's more of a relationship between doctors and patients. Let's not worry about just like coverage. We need actually good health care. And we've lost that. And spending is just through the roof. I put some numbers on this, but it's massive amounts of money that go into Medicare, Medicaid, and things of that nature. All right. The next issue, credit card users see higher rates. In the news, out of fear of an impending CFPB regulation, some banks have raised credit card interest rates and introduced new fees. But now it is uncertain if this rule to cap late fees at $8 per incident will ever take effect. We shouldn't have these price controls. The CFPB needs to get out of this business. I wish the Trump administration, the DOJ, whoever, would actually eliminate the CFPB. We don't need it. There are enough regulations and everything else going on. Let's let markets work. If these interest rates are too high, the consumer should shop somewhere else, or maybe don't put money on a credit card. There are a lot of other options of personal responsibility that we need. And this is all going to impact businesses, communities in the process, especially small businesses who often use these credit cards to manage cash flow, right? So the history lesson here is that price controls don't work. In fact, they work to hurt people, not to help. So let's get rid of this. All right. It's just bad idea overall. The next issue, new Texas Speaker of the House. In the news, Texas is gearing up for new leadership in the state legislature. That with House Representative David Cook expected to assume the role of Speaker after Dade Phelan stepped down from his bid for a third term. This has been widely thought was going to happen in Texas for a long time. Finally happened. I'm recording this on Friday. They're having a vote on who's going to be Speaker in the GOP caucus on Saturday. And then they'll vote on it whenever it comes in early January 14th when when this regular session starts. But they're trying to figure out who's going to be that person now. So we'll see. Maybe it changes, but I think it will probably be Representative David Cook. As the Lone Star State prepares for the 2025 legislative session, the focus turns to addressing pressing challenges, including skyrocketing government spending. And since 1970, Texas state and local government spending as a share of GDP has surged from 12% to 16.5%, burdening taxpayers and threatening economic competitiveness. What I think here is that I think it's a good thing that we're going to get a new Speaker of the House. I hope that this is a great opportunity for more conservative reforms, with a key part of this being strengthening spending limits and cutting spending. So the state is spending way too much. Republicans have a trifecta from governor, House, and Speaker majorities since 2003. And since then, what we've seen is increasing government spending. There have been a couple of good years that were in there where they were under population inflation, which is a maximum growth, right? Not a target. But overall, when you look at since 1996 or other periods, we're still well above even where we were there when Democrats were in control. And so we need more liberty-focused ideas and less government spending and lower taxes that'll tackle the affordability affordability crisis, and we'll have bold reforms for needed prosperity coming forward, where you can use surplus revenue to buy down school property taxes, have local governments do that to their property taxes so we can get to zero. Remember, eliminating property taxes is the key. Reducing the size of government's going to be key. Passing universal school choice where it's eligible for everyone and there's no more extra funding for public schools if kids leave. Let's not do that. And empowering parents to deal with kids being online on social media rather than politicians and bureaucrats. I'm tired of all this where government should be getting in the way when there's really no reason. And eliminating barriers to economic growth. This way, Texas can become a beacon of economic freedom and opportunity by implementing these reforms, which they should have been doing a long time ago. They need to do it now. Okay. That's what I got for you today. A lot of good information. Well, I don't know if it's all good, but at least I hope that you enjoyed it and it will help you to better understand what's going on in the world and ways that you as policymakers and influencers and others can make a difference in people's lives. All right. Thank you for joining me today. Remember to go find my information at vanceginn.com or my newsletter, vanceginn.substack.com. And until next time, God bless you and have a great day. Let people prosper.